The snow came early that winter, heavy and silent, covering the Colorado high country in a white so thick it swallowed the sound of the forest. For most, it was a season of stillness. But for one old wolf limping along a deserted road, it was a season of survival. His paw dragged blood dripping on the ice where steel had bitten deep. His breath rose in sharp clouds. He was alone, and he was losing the fight. A pair of headlights cut through the dark. Tires screeched. The wolf froze blinded. A truck swerved too late. The thud echoed in the cold night. Her name was Dr. Elena Marquez, a volunteer veterinarian who had traded the comfort of a city clinic for the raw uncertainty of a wildlife rescue program. That night, she stood at the edge of a table where a wild predator's life hung by a thread. The numbers haunted everyone involved. The odds were stacked against them. Each wolf lost was not just a life, it was a blow to the fragile promise of restoration. And now, under her hands, another one hovered between this world and the silence of the snow. Elena inhaled, steadying her trembling fingers. She knew wolves by reputation, fierce, untamable, feared, but she also knew them as patients, beating hearts, breathing bodies, fragile vessels of wildness. The wolf's chest shuddered. The monitors beeped irregularly. Every instinct told him to fight, and every ounce of training told her not to give up. Have you ever wondered what it takes to give a wild predator a second chance? What kind of person volunteers to carry the weight of that choice? The clock ticked. The storm raged outside. Inside, under the harsh glare of the operating room, one woman leaned forward, fighting for a life most would rather see gone. The sound of the monitor steadied just for a moment. Hope flickered in the room. What happened next would surprise everyone. Before the night of the surgery, before the headlights and the snow, there was a choice. A choice made by a woman who had nothing to gain but everything to give. Her name was Dr. Elena Marquez. Born in New Mexico, raised in a family of ranchers, she grew up watching the uneasy relationship between humans and predators. Her father taught her to mend fences, to herd cattle, to shoot coyotes when they came too close. But Elena was the daughter who always asked why. Why predators came near in the first place. Why coexistence felt impossible. Why fear spoke louder than facts. She studied veterinary medicine at Colorado State University, a path that set her apart from her family's traditions. While others raised livestock, she chose to save lives. Farm dogs, stray cats, injured horses. She was brilliant, steady-handed, but also restless. Ordinary cases no longer satisfied her. The call of something greater, something wild, pulled at her like a current. In 2023, Colorado reintroduced wolves to its wilderness. It was a historic decision. After decades of absence, the howl of wolves returned to the Rockies. But it was also controversial. Ranchers feared for their herds. Hunters argued it would ruin elk populations. Politicians debated funding. For conservationists, it was a dream realized. For skeptics, a nightmare reborn. Elena heard about the program through a colleague. They need vets, he said. But it's not for the faint of heart. These aren't pets. They're wild, dangerous, and most don't make it. Most. That word stayed with her. Out of the first 25 wolves, 8 had already died. Disease, collisions, illegal traps. Human fear and nature's indifference both exacted a price. Elena knew the statistics, and still she signed her name on the volunteer list. Why? Because years before she had failed. It was her final year of veterinary school. A wolf pup had been brought into the teaching hospital, rescued from a snare legs, twisted lungs collapsing. Elena had been one of the students assisting the procedure. Despite hours of work, despite every effort, the pup had died on the table. She remembered its small, rasping breaths, the way its paw twitched as if it still dreamed of running. She remembered the silence that followed and the weight in her chest. She promised herself then, if she ever had the chance, she would not walk away again. The wilderness of Colorado is not kind. The Rockies slice across the sky like a wall of stone. Snow buries valleys until only the peaks remain. Elk move in herds, wary and quick, and wolves newly returned test the boundaries of survival. But the wild is also beautiful. Sunrise over the Continental Divide, rivers threading through pine forests, meadows where wildflowers bloom in summer. This was the stage where Elena's story and the wolves would unfold. She arrived at the rescue center in late autumn. The building was modest, a converted barn with metal kennels, a makeshift surgical room, and a generator that groaned more than it worked. The staff was small, 2 full-time biologists, 3 rotating volunteers, and a handful of students. They were underfunded, overworked, but driven by something stronger than money. Passion, commitment, hope. Elena quickly became the heart of the team. She slept little, worked endlessly, and refused to cut corners. She cataloged every case, the fractures, the infections, the recoveries. She was not just a vet. She was a witness to suffering, to resilience, to the thin line between life and death. But there was something else, something unspoken. Elena felt it most at night when the howls carried through the valley. She would stand outside, breath clouding, listening. Each voice was different, deep, sharp, wavering. They sounded like grief and defiance, like loss and survival. They sounded like a question. Do we belong here? And deep inside, Elena carried an answer. Yes, you do. And I will fight to prove it. The setting around her was not just geography, it was conflict. Ranchers nearby muttered about dead calves, even when evidence showed mountain lions more likely. Hunters left angry notes at the center's gate. You're bringing trouble, one sign read. This land isn't yours to change. But wolves had already changed it. Their paws pressed into the snow. Their howls rolled across the ridges. Their presence was undeniable, unstoppable. It was in this tension between life and loss, hope and fear, that Elena found herself standing one evening watching headlights streak across the road, unaware that fate was about to bring her face to face with the wolf that would alter her life forever. It happened on a night when exhaustion weighed on everyone at the center. The storm had passed, leaving roads slick with ice, the air sharp with the metallic scent of winter. Elena had just finished suturing a fox when the radio cracked. A call from the highway patrol. There's an animal down. Big. Breathing, but barely. Mile marker 72. She grabbed her kit without a word. By now, she didn't need to ask. Wolves had a way of finding her. Or perhaps fate had a way of sending them. The wolf lay twisted on the ground. His coat was thick with snow, one leg bent unnaturally. His breaths came ragged. A pool of red spread beneath him, steaming against the cold. For a moment, Elena froze. Every instinct screamed caution. This was no dog. This was a wild predator. Even broken, he could lash out. But then his eyes opened. Golden, burning not with rage, but with something else. Pain, weariness, a spark that refused to die. Elena felt her heart tighten. She remembered the pup she had lost years ago. That night in the teaching hospital. That silence. She would not let it repeat here. Easy, boy, she whispered, her voice shaking. You're not alone. With practiced precision, she sedated him, checked his pulse, pressed gauze to his wounds. Then, with the help of a trooper, she lifted the 100-pound body into the truck. The wolf's head lolled against her arm, his breath warm for a moment against her sleeve. The drive back was a blur of icy roads and racing thoughts. The hum of the engine mixed with the fragile rhythm of his breaths. Elena whispered to him, though he could not hear. Hold on. Just hold on. Surgery began immediately. His leg was fractured, ribs cracked, internal bleeding suspected. Elena's hands moved fast but steady. Around her, the small team worked in silence, the air thick with urgency. There were moments when the monitor flatlined, when time seemed to stop. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She pushed adrenaline into his vein, pressed his chest, whispered words no one else could hear. And then a flicker, a pulse, a sound that felt like victory. Hours passed. When the storm outside began to fade, the wolf was still alive. Barely, but alive. Elena leaned against the wall, sweat dampening her hair under the surgical cap. Her hands trembled not from fatigue, but from something else. Relief. Awe. She approached the table, removing her mask. His eye opened once more, sluggish but aware. And in that fleeting glance she felt a bridge form, between healer and wild, between human and wolf. She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Fear melted into compassion. What she saw was not a predator, not an enemy, but a life fighting to continue. That night marked the beginning of something Elena could never have imagined. She had saved countless animals before, but this one was different. This one felt destined. As dawn bled into this valley, Elena wrote his case number into her log. But in her heart, she had already given him another name. She called him Shadow, for he had come out of the night, broken, yet still burning with the will to live. She closed the journal. Outside, the first rays of sun touched the Rockies. A new day, a fragile beginning. The hardest battles are not always fought on the operating table. Sometimes they begin after the heartbeat steadies, when survival demands more than skill. It demands patience, endurance, and trust. Shadow's fight had only just begun. The first 48 hours were critical. Infection could set in. Internal bleeding could return. The fracture might collapse. Elena barely left his side. She slept on a cot near the kennel, jolting awake at every beep of the monitor. Shadow groaned, twitched, sometimes bared his teeth when the pain overwhelmed him. She didn't flinch. She whispered instead. Words were less for him and more for herself. Stay. Keep fighting. You're not alone. Feeding was slow, painful. Wolves were not meant to eat from human hands. Every bite felt like a negotiation. But hunger won, as it always does. Days turned into weeks. Shadow's bones began to knit. The swelling eased. The fever broke. Each milestone felt like a triumph. A single step forward in a war against the odds. But with recovery came resistance. Wolves are not meant for cages. Even cages meant to save them. Shadow began to fight not Elena, but confinement itself. He lunged at the walls, snarled at the restraints, tested every weakness. To him, survival meant freedom. To her, survival required restraint. It was a fragile balance. One mistake could mean disaster. Elena adapted. She introduced physical therapy carefully, gently lifting his leg, massaging the muscles, coaxing movement back into the broken limb. He resisted, growling deep in his throat, but she held firm, her hands steady, her gaze unwavering. He's not fighting me, she told herself. He's fighting pain. He's fighting memory. And I have to fight with him, not against him. Each day, Shadow revealed more of himself. He howled at dusk, a lonely, resonant sound that rolled across the valley. He bared his teeth at strangers, but lowered his head when Elena entered. He carried the wild within him, and yet somehow he allowed her near. Wildlife officers arrived unannounced, reminding the team that wolves were not pets. They were state-managed, federally protected. You can't keep him too long, they warned. Rehabilitation must lead to release. Elena nodded, hiding the weight in her chest. She knew the rules, but rules did not feel enough when a life still trembled on the edge. Outside the clinic, tensions grew. Ranchers accused the program of wasting resources. "Why save killers?" one man spat. "They'll just come for our calves." Conservationists argued back. Science proved wolves killed less than 1% of livestock deaths, but fear rarely listens to numbers. Elena listened to both sides. She felt the storm pressing closer. But inside the kennel, none of that mattered. Inside, it was about breath, pulse, recovery. He had nearly slipped away, but he hadn't, and neither had she. In that fragile, desperate night, a bond was sealed not by choice, but by survival. Shadow lived. Against odds, against doubt, against fear, he lived. And with every step he took toward recovery, Elena walked beside him. This was no ordinary case. This was a story unfolding, one neither of them could escape. Recovery is never a straight line. It rises, it falls, and sometimes it crashes with the weight of the unexpected. For Shadow and Elena, the test of their bond did not come in silence. It came in the roar of a storm. It was January when the blizzard struck. Forecasts warned of snow, but no one predicted its fury. Winds screamed down from the peaks at 70 miles per hour. Ice glazed every road. And inside the rescue center, fragile lives depended on machines that hummed and flickered under the strain of power lines. Shadow paced his enclosure restlessly, sensing the shift in the air long before the storm hit. Wolves know the language of weather. Their instincts sharpen when danger approaches. Elena moved through the barn, checking generators, tightening blankets around kennels. Every motion carried urgency. She had seen storms before, but not like this. This one felt different, violent, unforgiving. The power was gone. For most homes, it meant cold. In the center, it meant death. Ventilators, incubators, heating lamps. Everything vital shut down in an instant. The wolves shivered. The youngest whimpered. Shadow's snarled eyes glowing in the dark, pacing like a caged storm of his own. Elena's chest tightened. They had no backup generator strong enough to power everything. Choices had to be made. Which animals to save first? Which to risk? And in that moment, the line between science and faith blurred. His breaths were shallow. The cold seeped into his healing bones. Without warmth, his body would fail. She knew it. He knew it. His eyes met hers through the dark, defiant, yet desperate. "No machine will keep you alive tonight," she whispered. "It's us now." Time bent in that storm. Minutes stretched into hours. Elena held him heartbeat to heartbeat while the wind tore at the walls outside. She could feel the tremors in his chest, the fight in every breath. She whispered stories into his fur, not to soothe him, but to remind herself that they were still alive. Through that endless night, Elena learned the meaning of surrender. Not giving up, but giving everything. She had crossed a line most would never dare. She had become more than a veterinarian. She had become his anchor. He had survived because of her, and she because of him. The storm had taken roofs, trees, livestock across the valley. But in the barn, not a single wolf had been lost. Against the odds, everyone lived. And for Shadow, the night was more than survival. It was transformation. He was no longer just a patient. He was a survivor, a partner in endurance. Elena felt it deeply. Their bond was no longer one-sided. He had accepted her presence, not as a master, not as an owner, but as something far rarer. A companion in the fight against death itself. It was not a howl of hunger, not one of fear. It was defiance, survival, and gratitude. For Elena, it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The storm had passed, but the fight was far from over. Outside the walls of the center, a different kind of blizzard gathered, a storm of voices, of politics, of fear. And unlike snow, this storm left scars that were harder to heal. Word spread quickly. A wolf had survived thanks to the center's care. To conservationists, it was a miracle. To ranchers, it was a threat reborn. "They save killers," one man said to the news cameras, "while our families pay the price." Science told a different story. More than 86% of livestock deaths came from disease accidents or weather. Wolves accounted for less than 1%. But facts rarely silence fear. Elena knew the numbers. She could recite every statistic, every chart. But numbers did not soothe angry neighbors, and they did not bend the laws written on paper. Her heart sank. Shadow was healing, yes, but not whole. His legs still stiff, his stamina weak. Releasing him now would mean death in the wild. She argued. She pleaded. She pointed to medical charts, X-rays, progress logs. "He's not ready," she said. "Another few months. Please." But the officers only shook their heads. Regulations were clear. Wolves were to be wild or not at all. The debate spilled into the community. At town halls, conservationists argued for patience for science. Ranchers countered with stories of fear of danger of livelihoods at risk. Shadow's name became a symbol, though few had ever seen him. Elena listened from the back of the hall, silent, her hands clenched. Shadow was no longer just a wolf. He was a question the entire state was asking. Do wolves deserve a place here? Public opinion turned Elena into both hero and target. Strangers sent letters of gratitude. Others sent threats. Some nights, she found angry notes nailed to the barn door at "Nature take its course." The battle was no longer about stitches or scars. It was about law, about fear, about the fragile space wolves occupied in the human heart. And soon, Elena would face a decision that no statistic, no regulation could prepare her for. Every story of survival has a turning point. For Shadow and Elena, it was not a battle against storm or injury. It was a battle against time and against the rules that governed life and death in the wild. The decision had been made. Shadow would be released. Elena stood in the barn, one hand resting against the cool steel of his enclosure. Shadow paced inside, stronger now, his limp nearly gone. He had muscle again, his coat thick with winter fur. By every chart he was ready. By every law his time had come. But Elena's heart refused to agree. She remembered every moment, the night she carried him in from the road, the hours of surgery, the storm when she held him through the dark. He was more than a case file. He was a life bound to hers. When the moment came, she hesitated. The gate opened. For a heartbeat, Shadow froze, ears pricked, muscles tense. Then he stepped into the crate, as if guided by something beyond fear. Elena walked beside him as they drove into the mountains. Her hand rested against the bars, feeling the vibration of his breath. She whispered stories he could not understand, but perhaps could feel. The release site was a clearing miles from any ranch. Fresh elk tracks crisscrossed the snow. A stream cut through the trees, whispering with promise. The officers lifted the crate from the truck. Elena stepped forward, her boots crunching in the frost. The key trembled in her hand. She crouched beside the crate, her face level with his. For the last time their eyes met. "Go," she whispered, though her voice broke. "Go where you belong." Elena's chest ached. She watched him vanish into the trees, each stride carrying him further from her. But then, halfway across the clearing, Shadow stopped. He turned. His golden eyes caught the sun. He held her gaze for one long breath, and then he lifted his head and howled. It was not just a howl. It was a promise, a thank you, a memory sealed in sound. And then he was gone, swallowed by the wilderness, the snow covering his tracks within minutes. She had given him everything, and in return he had given her something greater, proof that compassion could meet wildness and not be broken. The forest swallowed him. The snow erased his tracks. And just like that, Shadow was gone. For Elena, the silence afterward was unbearable. She stood in the clearing long after the officers had packed up the crates and left. The world felt too quiet, too hollow. She had fought so hard to keep him alive only to let him go. But this was the paradox of rescue. To save a life meant learning how to lose it. The days that followed felt endless. At the center, she went back to work, suturing wounds, treating fevers, cataloging cases. But her thoughts drifted always to the ridge where Shadow had vanished. Had he survived? Had he found a pack? Or had the wild claimed him once more? The answers lay beyond her reach. Yet fate has its way of speaking sometimes when least expected. Reports began to surface. A male wolf, limping slightly, had been seen trailing elk herds north of the valley. Tracks found near rivers. A howl heard at dusk, answered by smaller voices. Elena listened to the radio updates, heart racing. The description matched him. Strong enough to hunt, alive enough to lead. Shadow had not just survived. He had returned stronger, and not alone. A small pack had formed around him, wolves who followed his lead, who echoed his howl. For Elena, the image brought tears. Not of sorrow this time, but of relief. She had not fought in vain. He was where he belonged. But the story did not end there. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and gold, she heard it, the long, low note of a howl drifting across the valley. Familiar, resonant. She stepped outside, her breath caught. On the ridge above, a figure stood silhouetted against the fading light. Shadow. Her chest tightened. He did not approach. He did not linger. He only stood there howling, once long, unwavering, before melting back into the forest. But that single moment was enough. He remembered. In a way only wolves can, in a language beyond words, he remembered. The valley soon filled with stories of the scarred wolf who led a pack. Ranchers still cursed his name, but others began to see him as something else. A survivor, a symbol of wildness, reborn. For Elena, he was more than that. He was proof of a promise. She had learned the hardest truth of all: to love the wild is to accept its distance. To save a wolf is not to keep it, but to set it free. And though her hands no longer touched his fur, her heart carried his howl forever. Shadow had returned to the wild, and in doing so, he gave her something no law, no storm, no fear could take away: hope. Every story carries a lesson, and the story of Shadow, the scarred wolf who lived, who led, who remembered, carries more than one. First, it is a reminder of science. Wolves are not villains of legend. They are keystone species shaping ecosystems, balancing prey, bringing rivers back to life. Their survival is not a threat, it is a necessity. Second, it is a reminder of compassion. Numbers and charts matter, but in the end, it is people like Elena, volunteers, veterinarians, wildlife officers, who turn those numbers into lives saved. Without their dedication, Shadow would have been another statistic. Instead, he became a symbol. Third, it is a reminder of coexistence. Fear will always shout louder than facts, but coexistence begins not with laws or politics, but with perspective. To see wolves not as enemies, but as neighbors, not as killers, but as survivors. Yes, wolves take risks. Yes, they test boundaries. But the true cost of their absence, the silence of forests without howls, the imbalance of prey unchecked, is far greater than the cost of their return. Finally, it is a reminder of love. To save a wolf means learning to let go. Elena gave Shadow her hands, her sleepless nights, her warmth through the storm. And he gave her in return a gift no one else could, the knowledge that compassion can leave echoes even in the wildest places. So, when you hear the call of a wolf in the distance, remember, every howl carries a story. a story of survival, of loss, of resilience, and of the people who believe that even the wild deserves a second chance. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window, warm and ordinary, but William sensed the storm long before it arrived. He was sipping coffee when the sharp growl of an engine echoed into the driveway. Tires screeched. A car door slammed, then another. Jessica froze at the sink. "It's them!" The doorbell rang once, hard, demanding. Then came the pounding of fists. William set his mug down carefully, as if bracing for impact. "Stay here," he told Jessica. "No," she said firmly. "We face this together." He nodded, then opened the door. Samantha stood there, her face flushed, her hair disheveled, as if she'd rushed out in anger. Peter loomed behind her, his posture radiating menace. "Dad," Samantha spat, "we need to talk." William blocked the doorway, his frame steady, though his heart hammered. "We already talked. I was clear. You were insane," she snapped. "You cut me off without warning. After everything Mom and I sacrificed while you worked those shifts, you dare treat me like a beggar." "Sacrifice?" William's voice sharpened. "You had ballet lessons, summer camps, brand-name shoes. I worked double shifts while men called me boy and slammed doors in my face. Don't you talk to me about sacrifice." Peter stepped forward, his bulk shadowing the doorway. "Listen, old man. You think this makes you powerful, cutting off our money. You owe her. You owe us. Family doesn't turn its back." William met his glare with a steady calm. "Family doesn't send snakes into each other's homes. Family doesn't use children as weapons." Samantha's eyes blazed. "You'll never see Emma and Jake again if you don't fix this. They'll grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over love." The words might once have shattered him, but not today. William's gaze hardened. "If love means buying silence with cash, then I don't want it. And if keeping them away spares them from your manipulation, then maybe that's a blessing." Shock rippled across Samantha's face. She hadn't expected defiance. Peter's smirk faltered. "You think you're untouchable?" Peter growled, leaning close enough that William could smell the bitterness on his breath. "We know where you live. We know your routines. You'd better rethink your position." Jessica's hand tightened on William's arm, but he didn't flinch. "Are you threatening me?" Peter's eyes narrowed. "I'm saying family matters. And when you cut us off, there are consequences." William stepped forward just enough that Peter was forced back. "There already are consequences. You're living them. Now get off my porch." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Samantha grabbed Peter's arm, pulling him toward the car. "This isn't over," she hissed. As the engine roared and their car sped away, Jessica released the breath she'd been holding. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with pride. "You didn't back down," she whispered. William closed the door with deliberate calm. "I can't afford to anymore. Not with them. Not with anyone."